The letter arrived just after midnight, slipped under my apartment door without a sound. No knock. No footsteps. Just a faint scent of myrrh and wax that clung to the air like smoke after a fire. I was still half awake, surrounded by stacks of old prayer books and half-burnt incense sticks. My eyes burned from studying, ancient rites, lost languages, symbols that whispered when you stared too long. I should have known then. Nothing good ever arrives with a red wax seal from the Eastern Orthodox Church. I picked it up. The paper was thick, stained at the edges like it had passed through too many hands. The seal bore a double-headed eagle with a broken halo, an old sigil no longer used. A sign. One I hadn't seen since the last time someone was possessed beyond saving. The letter was short. No greeting. No signature. Just one sentence. You are to report to the monastery of St. Cyprian immediately. Bring only what the rite demands. No address. No explanation. But I already knew where it was. St. Cyprian sat near the border of Romania and Serbia, built into the side of a mountain centuries ago. Forgotten by time. Abandoned by all, but those who knew what evil smelled like. I'd never been, but I'd read about it. The place was whispered about during my training, a monastery built above a gate that never fully closed. The next morning, I packed only what I needed. My crucifix, blessed in Jerusalem, a flask of holy water, my leather-bound book of rites, stained with old blood, and the stole, the purple cloth that marked me as a soldier in a war most people couldn't see. By noon, I was on a bus heading east, toward a part of the map where roads stopped having names. The further we went, the quieter it got. Villages thinned out. Trees grew taller and darker, bending like they were trying to whisper warnings to each other. No one spoke. Even the driver avoided looking at me. Maybe he knew. Maybe he saw the calloused hands, the tired eyes, the burned scar that ran along my wrist like a serpent. We arrived just before dusk. The monastery looked like it had grown out of the mountain itself, stone on stone, blackened by rain and time. Ivy crawled across its walls like veins. A single bell tower loomed overhead, its cross crooked as if the mountain tried to shake it off. As I stepped off the bus, the driver made the sign of the cross without a word and sped off. The gates creaked open before I could knock. A monk stood there in silence. Hooded, eyes hidden. He didn't speak. He just handed me a rolled parchment tied with black thread. I opened it slowly, hands trembling. 13 rules. Each one written in ink that looked too dark to be just ink. And at the bottom in red. Failure to follow any of these rules may result in the soul of the exorcist being forfeited. No name. No signature. Again, I looked up at the monk. Who is the possessed? I asked. He paused. For the first time, he raised his head. His voice cracked like old wood. His name is Perez. The name hit me like a punch to the chest. Perez. We trained together. Ate from the same wooden bowls. Studied the same cursed texts. Until one night, he disappeared. That was 12 years ago. Now he was back. And he was waiting for me in a monastery built on a crack in hell. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and stepped inside. The gates closed behind me with a sound like a coffin sealing shut. I had no idea what I was walking into. But I knew one thing. The rules were not made to protect me. The monastery doors groaned as they closed behind me, sealing me in with the heavy scent of incense and old stone. A tall, wiry monk in a black robe approached, his face hidden behind a thick beard and shadowed hood. He held a rolled-up parchment tied with a red ribbon. "Father Edward," he said, his voice dry like cracked leaves. "Before you begin, you must read and accept the rules." I took the scroll. The ribbon left a faint smear of red on my fingertips. It felt warm, almost too warm. As I unrolled the parchment, a strange hush filled the room, as if even the wind dared not speak. There were 13 rules written in old Cyrillic script, then translated beneath in English by a trembling hand. Do not question the church's intentions during the rite. Begin the exorcism only after sunset. The possessed must not be restrained unless he asks to be. Use holy water only once per session. The room must remain locked until the ritual ends. Never call the demon by name unless it gives permission. If the possessed weeps, the priest must bleed. Do not pray in Latin. Only the ancient tongue is accepted. No mirrors in the room. Cover or remove them all. Keep your crucifix hidden until the final stage. If the candles go out on their own, leave immediately. Do not eat or drink after midnight during the days of the rite. Never look at your own reflection during the ritual. I read the list twice. My skin prickled with each rule, especially number 7. It made no sense. And number 13, it made my stomach turn. These aren't just guidelines, the monk said. They are binding. If you break even one, we cannot protect you. I looked up at him. Protect me from what? He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and gestured for me to follow. We walked down a narrow corridor lit by tall candles mounted to the stone walls. The flames flickered as we passed, as if they feared us. The monk's name was Brother Theophan. He moved slowly but purposefully, each step echoing through the empty halls like a soft warning. As we walked, I noticed how cold the air became, how the stones beneath my feet seemed to pulse with a slow, steady beat. Finally, we reached a thick wooden door reinforced with iron. A small cross was carved into the center. He is inside, Brother Theophan whispered. Who is he? I asked, though I already had a terrible feeling I knew. Your assignment. The possessed. He paused. His name is Perez. The name struck me like a stone to the chest. Perez. My old friend. My brother in faith. The man who vanished without a trace 5 years ago after studying the forbidden texts. No, I breathed. That can't be him. But Brother Theophan was already unlocking the door. The moment it creaked open, a wave of heat poured out, thick and sour, like something long dead had been rotting in the walls. I stepped inside. The room was dimly lit by a single candle in the corner. It smelled of burnt wood and sulfur. Chains lay unused in the corner, just as Rule 3 dictated. And there, sitting hunched in the far shadow, was a man, or something that had once been a man. His hair was wild and matted, his eyes barely visible in the gloom. But I knew that face. I had seen it many times in the chapel back in seminary. The jawline. The scar near the temple from when he fell during a snowstorm hike. Perez? I said softly. His head snapped up. His eyes were black. Not dark brown or bloodshot, but black. Like pools of ink. He smiled, though his lips barely moved. Edward, he croaked. His voice was layered, like two people speaking at once, one calm, the other taunting. You came. My mouth went dry. My legs locked. Something primal inside me screamed to run, but I couldn't. I had to stay. I had to understand. Why are you here? I asked. You know why, he whispered. Because you followed the rules. The candle flickered, then went out. Behind me, the door slammed shut. And in the darkness, I heard him laughing. The door creaked open with a low groan, like it hadn't been touched in years. The hallway behind it was narrow and smelled of rust, smoke, and something sweetly rotten. A single candle burned on the far wall, flickering in a draft that I couldn't feel. A monk stood beside me, silent, his hood pulled low over his face. This is the room, he said without looking at me. Enter only if your heart is strong. I stepped inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, something shifted in the air. The candlelight dimmed, though it didn't die. My skin crawled. My breath felt heavier, like I had stepped into a swamp of cold air and bad memories. He sat in the far corner of the room, shackled to the wall by chains blackened with soot. His back was hunched, his hair long and matted. At first, I couldn't even be sure it was him. But then he looked up. Perez. Or what was left of him. His face was pale and hollow, as if something had drained the life out of him, but left the skin behind. His eyes, God help me, his eyes weren't right. They were pitch black. Not dark, not shadowed. Just black. Like a void that stared back. And then he smiled. Edward, he said, and though the voice was his, it sounded like it had been fed through 1,000 mouths. A whisper wrapped in thunder. They sent you. Of course they did. I stepped back. Perez, what happened to you? He laughed, a dry, rattling sound. His head tilted, unnatural, like his neck was too loose. I opened the wrong door. I asked the wrong questions. And now I am many. His chains rattled as he shifted. The sound echoed louder than it should have in such a small room. The candle flickered again. I watched it carefully, waiting to see if it would go out. I came to help, I said. I've been sent by the church. He hissed. The church. Always watching. Always using. You don't even know what they've done, do you? I took a slow breath, forcing myself to keep my hands steady. I reached into my coat and pulled out the small silver cross I always carried. It had been blessed, passed down by my mentor years ago. A part of me still believed in it. I had to. When I held it out toward him, he jerked back as if burned. Steam rose from his skin. His mouth opened in a silent scream, and for a moment, I thought he was about to break free from the chains. And then just as quickly, he stopped. Collapsed to the ground. I stepped closer, cautiously. Perez? He looked up again. And this time, something had changed. His eyes, just for a moment, were blue. His voice was weak, trembling, his lips cracked. "Edward, help me please." My heart stopped. That was him. The real him. I stepped forward, forgetting my fear. Then his eyes flicked back to black, and his smile returned. "Got you." The lights exploded. The candle shattered. And I was thrown against the wall by something I couldn't see, something that roared with a voice too deep to belong to anything human. I blacked out for a moment. When I came to, I was lying just outside the room. The monk stood above me. "You went in too soon," he said coldly. "You broke Rule 3. I tried to sit up, but my body ached. "What's Rule 3? He looked at me with empty eyes. Never believe the tears. He walked away, his robes brushing against the stone floor like whispers. Behind the door, I could hear Perez laughing. Or the thing inside him. I didn't know anymore. And I began to wonder if I ever really did. I hadn't slept much. The wind outside howled like it had a soul of its own, and every creak of the wooden beams above my room sounded like whispers in a language I almost recognized. The kind of almost that gets under your skin. By morning, I felt colder than the stone floor beneath my boots. But it wasn't just the weather. It was something deeper, something I couldn't shake off. It sat on my chest like a weight I'd carried for years. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my hands. The right one still bore the red imprint of the cross that had scorched me during yesterday's failed exorcism. Perez's voice still echoed in my ears, not the deep, demonic one, but the soft, pleading one. The voice of a man I once knew better than anyone else in the world. Back when we were both in seminary, Perez had been brilliant. He could memorize ancient texts faster than anyone, and he had a sharpness that made the professors nervous. But while I stuck to the rules, the traditions, the safe path, the church's path, Perez always wanted to know more. He asked questions no one wanted to answer. Why do demons speak in dead languages? Why do some possessions last for years while others burn out in days? Why does the church hide certain rites? I remember one night in particular. We were in the old library beneath the monastery, both of us bent over books with cracked leather covers. Candlelight danced on the stone walls. I was reviewing prayers for protection. Perez, on the other hand, was reading a text that was clearly forbidden. "What is that?" I asked. He looked up slowly, like someone waking from a dream. "It's a copy of the Thessaloniki Codex. Lost to time," they said. But it wasn't lost, Edward. Just buried. I remember how his eyes looked that night. Bright. Hungry. There was something else in them, too, something restless. "You shouldn't be reading that," I told him. "You know what the church says." He smiled. "The church fears what it doesn't understand. But if we don't look deeper, how can we fight the darkness?" A week later, I reported him. I told Father Anastasios everything. The books, the questions, the way Perez had begun to skip morning prayers and stay locked in the basement long past midnight. I told myself it was the right thing to do. I told myself I was protecting him, from himself, from the devil, from whatever he was getting close to. They expelled him quietly. No trial, no excommunication. Just a quiet vanishing. He was gone by sunrise the next day. I never heard from him again. Until now. Seeing him chained in that room, his skin pale and his eyes filled with something far older than fear, I felt a sickness crawl into my stomach. I wasn't looking at a stranger. I was looking at the man I betrayed. And part of me wondered, had I caused this? I stepped into the chapel. The light through the stained glass windows cast long, distorted shapes on the walls, red, gold, and a deep violet. I sat alone in the front pew, gripping my rosary so tightly the beads dug into my fingers. Why had the church called me, of all people, to exorcise Perez? Did they know our history? Was this some kind of test? Or worse, a punishment? I looked up at the old icon of Saint Cyprian above the altar. His painted eyes seemed to follow me. I whispered a prayer under my breath, but it felt thin. Hollow. From the shadows, I thought I heard Perez's voice again. Soft. Weeping. "Edward, why didn't you listen?" I turned, but no one was there. Just the wind. Or maybe it wasn't. Because that night, in my dreams, I saw the library again. But this time, it was Perez standing alone in the dark, surrounded by flickering candles. His eyes were all black, and he was smiling. Not at me, but through me. And somewhere deep in the silence, a voice whispered the old rule I had forgotten. Those who turn their backs on the truth will face it in the end. I woke up gasping, and I knew I couldn't run from the past anymore. Because the past had found me, and it wore Perez's face. I didn't sleep that night. My bed at the monastery felt colder than stone, and the howling wind outside the stained glass windows whispered words I couldn't understand. Each gust carried something ancient with it, something watching. I kept going over the rules in my head. Rule 7 kept standing out. If the possessed weeps, the priest must bleed. I thought it was metaphorical, maybe a warning about emotional pain, or perhaps just another strange ritual from the old texts. But the truth hit me much harder. Rule 7 wasn't a warning. It was a promise. That morning, I entered the chamber again. The door creaked open slowly, and the stench of mildew, sweat, and something far worse curled into my nose. The cell was dimly lit, a single candle dancing on a cracked wooden table in the corner. Perez sat chained to the wall, motionless, his head slumped forward. I thought he was asleep, or maybe unconscious. But then I heard it. A small sound. Soft. Wet. Crying. I froze. He lifted his head slowly. His eyes were sunken and dark, his lips cracked and bleeding. But what shook me, what chilled my bones, were the tears. Real, human tears. They slid down his pale cheeks like a quiet storm. No rage. No screams. Just quiet, broken weeping. "Edward," he whispered. My name. Not in a growl. Not in a demon's hiss. Just my name. Like the old days. Back when we studied together. Back when he was still human. "I didn't ask for this," he said. "They knew. They all knew. And they sent me anyway." I wanted to move toward him. I wanted to grab his shoulders, to shake him, to ask what he meant. But my feet wouldn't budge. Then it started. A sharp pain, like a hot needle, shot through my forehead. I gasped. Reached up. My fingers came away wet. Blood. Thick, dark, and warm. Running from both my eyes. I stumbled backward, nearly slipping on the stone floor. My vision blurred with red. I blinked and blinked, but the blood kept coming. It dripped down my face, onto my robes, onto the floor. The candle flickered. Perez looked up and smiled through his tears. But it wasn't his smile. Something twisted lived behind it. Something that wasn't him. "You broke the 7th rule," he said. Or it said. The voice wasn't human anymore. It echoed, layered like a choir singing in reverse. I backed away, pressing my body to the wooden door, reaching blindly for the handle. "Do you feel it now?" the thing whispered. "Your rules don't protect you. They mark you." I shoved the door open and stumbled out, collapsing in the hallway. One of the younger monks rushed toward me. I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry. They took me to the infirmary, wrapped my head, wiped the blood. But no one asked what happened. No one even looked me in the eye. They already knew. Lying there on the thin mattress, I remembered something Father Ignatius once said during our training. Demons don't just break you. They make you watch. And I had watched. I had seen a friend cry, and in doing so, I had let something ancient touch me. I don't know how much of Perez is still in there. But I do know this. The rules are not sacred. They are warnings. And I had only broken one. The night was still, but I couldn't sleep. The monastery walls creaked with age, whispering things they had no business whispering. I lay on my cot, staring at the wooden ceiling, trying to ignore the sound of Perez sobbing in the next room. His cries were like a dying animal, soft, wet, and full of something that didn't belong in this world. There was something wrong with this place. Not just the man possessed. Not just the rules. The air itself felt heavy, like it carried secrets too old for language. It was after midnight when I lit my lantern and left my room. I wasn't sure where I was going, only that I needed answers. The rules, they weren't protecting us. They were hiding something. The chapel sat silent at this hour, soaked in candle wax and shadows. Icons of saints lined the walls, their painted eyes watching me with an odd mix of pity and warning. I walked to the front, where the altar stood carved in blackened oak. My fingers grazed the edge of the cloth draped across it. That's when I saw it. A faint draft of air, brushing against my ankles. Cold, steady. Too cold for this time of year. I crouched and lifted the cloth. There was a trapdoor beneath the altar. It was almost hidden, aged to match the stone floor. No latch, just a small iron ring. My heart pounded. This wasn't mentioned in any of the monastery's maps or texts. I hesitated. I shouldn't have gone down there. I knew that. But I was already kneeling before it, already placing my hand on the iron ring. It opened with a long groan, the kind of sound that feels like it scratches your bones. A narrow stairwell spiraled into darkness. I took the lantern and descended slowly. The steps were worn smooth, as if hundreds of feet had once climbed them regularly, but not recently. Cobwebs stretched across the corners. Dust lay thick as ash. At the bottom, the air changed. It was colder, damp, and it smelled of rot and old incense. I moved carefully through the tunnel, walls pressed close on both sides, carved from black stone that shimmered in places like it remembered fire. My lantern's glow only reached so far, but it was enough to see the bones. Skulls lined the walls. Human skulls. Dozens of them, some cracked, some missing jaws. They weren't stacked like an ossuary. They were placed with intention. Some had symbols carved into their foreheads, crosses, circles, eyes. I reached a small chamber at the end. There, kneeling against the far wall, was a mummified corpse in priest's robes. The cloth was stiff with age, but the shape of the cross on his chest was still visible. In his hands, locked in brittle fingers, was a book. No, more than a book. A journal. Its cover was bound in something I didn't want to identify. It looked like leather at first, but it was too thin. Too soft. Human skin. I swallowed hard and reached out. His fingers broke apart as I pulled it free. The journal was warm, somehow. I opened it. The writing was in Greek, old and faded, but I could make out enough. The entries were detailed accounts from an exorcist named Father Ionas. His final words chilled me more than the cold ever could. The rules protect the seal, not the soul. The demon is not bound by the rite, it is fed by it. Every rule broken is a door opened. Every word obeyed strengthens its cage. The 13 rules do not guard the priest. They protect the demon's prison. I stepped back, hands shaking. This changed everything. The rituals we were following, they weren't safety measures. They were instructions, meant to keep the demon intact. To stop anyone from destroying it. It all made sense now. Perez had broken the seal, or come close. That's why they sent me. Not to save him, but to reinforce the cage. And if I failed, they'd bury us both beneath this monastery, and start again. The lantern flickered, and I thought I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, breath held. Nothing. Only the dark. I closed the journal, and tucked it under my robe. It was time to return. But I knew now, there would be no more blind obedience. If I was going to save Perez, or myself, I'd have to break the rules. One by one. I never wanted to look at the mirror. Rule 13 was clear. Never look at your own reflection during the exorcism. Simple. Strange, but simple. Yet by now, I had already broken 6 rules, and the others had bent like dying branches. Some part of me still believed the rules were there to protect me. But that belief had started to rot. That night, the air in my room was too still. The candles wouldn't stay lit. The flame would hiss, flicker once, and die, as if something breathed it out. I could hear chanting coming from the chapel down the hall, soft, endless, wrong. No one was supposed to be in the chapel after midnight. No one alive, anyway. I couldn't sleep. My skin itched with something I couldn't scratch away. So I walked. The monastery walls were colder than usual. Every painting of a saint seemed to follow me with disappointed eyes. I ended up back at the room where the exorcism was held, where Perez sat chained in silence. Or so I thought. When I pushed open the heavy wooden door, I stopped cold. Perez wasn't asleep. He was standing. No chains. He was facing the mirror on the far wall. The same mirror I had avoided since I arrived. His body was still, too still, and his head tilted slightly as if listening to something inside the glass. "Perez?" I said, my voice dry. He turned his head, slow like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. He grinned. Not like before. This smile was wide, toothy, and human. It didn't belong on his face. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered, and yet I felt it inside my chest. My breath caught. I should have left. I should have obeyed the rule. But curiosity is a cursed thing, and fear has a way of freezing reason. I stepped forward. Just a little. Just enough to see it. The mirror. At first, it looked normal. Dusty old. My reflection stood there, motionless, just as it should. But then it moved. Not fast. Not sudden. But wrong. It blinked before I did. My reflection tilted its head, the opposite way I did. It smiled when I didn't. It reached up and placed a hand against the glass. And I swear to God, it mouthed my name. Not Perez's. Mine. I stumbled back, my heart thudding in my ears. No. The room spun. I looked back at Perez, but he was gone. Or maybe he was never there to begin with. The chains were coiled neatly in the corner, untouched. I ran. My boots slammed against the stone floor, echoing off the ancient walls. I didn't stop until I was back in my room, locking the door behind me like a child afraid of monsters under the bed. And maybe that's what I was now, just a frightened boy pretending to be a priest. I didn't sleep, not even with the lights on. And when morning came, I noticed something that chilled me more than the mirror. The reflection in the hallway as I passed a stained glass window. It smiled before I did. Again, something had changed. Something inside me. Something had come through. I had broken Rule 13. And now something knew my face. The bell in the chapel stopped ringing hours ago, yet its echo still clung to the walls of the monastery like a ghost. I stood in the hallway, staring at the candlelight flickering against the cold stone, the shadows dancing with movements too smooth, too human. My breath was heavy. I hadn't slept in 2 days. Perez's voice, no, the thing inside him, kept replaying in my head. You know what they're doing, Edward. You just don't want to believe it. I turned the corner toward the abbot's chamber. The wooden door stood half open, the faint scent of burning myrrh leaking out. Inside, Abbot Grigori sat at his desk, his hands folded over an old book, his eyes already waiting for me. You've been reading the journal, he said calmly. Not a question. A statement. I found it by accident, I said. Beneath the altar, down in the catacombs. Why was it hidden? Grigori closed the book gently, like one might close the eyes of the dead. Because some truths must be buried, even from our own priests, he replied. Sit. I didn't want to, but I sat. You've seen the rules. You followed them, barely. But do you know why they exist? They're protections, I said. Grigori gave a slight, bitter smile. No, Edward. The rules aren't to protect you. They're to protect it. The rules are part of the pact. His words dropped into the silence like stones in water. What pact? I asked. The old man leaned back, his eyes heavy with age and guilt. 300 years ago, this monastery was a battleground. A powerful demon, Thamiel, entered a host and began spreading madness. But instead of destroying it, the church made a deal. If Thamiel stayed within one vessel, in one place, obeying one set of rules, we would not interfere. My throat dried. You're saying, the church lets it live? Yes, Grigori whispered. And it has cooperated. Until now. I stood, fists clenched. You lied to me. You brought me here knowing I wouldn't exorcise it. No, he said firmly. We brought you here because you're the only one who still believes in the right. But belief alone is not enough anymore. The vessel is weakening. Perez, your friend, he's slipping. The demon wants out. I shook my head. So you want me to what? Strengthen the cage? If you can. If not, you know what happens. A strange sound filled the air then. Half scream, half laughter, rising from the chapel below. Perez. I turned to leave, my hand already reaching for the rosary at my side. One more thing, Grigori called out. I paused. If you try to destroy it, Edward, understand this. You won't just be defying the demon. You'll be defying the church. I didn't respond. I walked out, heart thundering, thoughts racing. And for the first time since I arrived, I realized something far more terrifying than the demon beneath this monastery. The church fears the truth. And now so do I. I couldn't sleep. The old stone walls of the monastery pressed in around me like a tomb. Cold air hissed through the cracks, whispering in a language I couldn't understand. Outside my small window, the moon hung low, bloated and red like a bleeding eye. It watched me, I swear it did. Perez had stopped speaking entirely. No growls. No pleas. Just silence. But I could still feel him. Beneath the floorboards. Behind the walls. Inside the shadows. Something was changing. Earlier that day, I had found the journal deep in the catacombs. It had been hidden beneath the mummified priest, wrapped in a cloth soaked with something dark and dry. The leather cover looked like skin, too thin, too pale. The kind of thing that makes your stomach turn, but you open it anyway. Because you have to. That journal was written by Father Dionysius, one of the first exorcists to serve in the monastery centuries ago. His words were shaky, desperate. Some pages were torn. Others were blackened with soot. But one thing was clear. He had learned the truth about the rules. The rules, he wrote, are not protection. They are chains. Chains for the exorcist. Not the demon. He had mentioned a 14th line. A forbidden line. Something left out of every holy manual, every scroll, every whispered teaching. A final phrase that could end the possession. Not suppress it, not contain it, but end it. No one was supposed to know it. But I knew it now. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. I sat on the stone floor of my room, the journal open before me. My candle was nearly gone. The wax had bled over the pages like old tears. And there, written in tiny ink, almost invisible. Speak this only once. Speak this only when your soul is willing to burn. The words were Latin, but not like the rest. These were older. Harsher. They looked like they didn't want to be read, like they might leap off the page and crawl into my mouth. My fingers trembled as I traced them. My breath was shallow. I felt a weight pressing down on my chest, as if the very act of reading them had stirred something awake. A knock echoed on the door. Not loud, just deliberate. 3 slow knocks. I stood, heart pounding. Who is it? No answer. I opened the door. Nothing. Only the empty hallway, lit by flickering candlelight. The cold air licked my face. I stepped out, half expecting someone to be waiting in the shadows. But there was no one. Then I saw it. A trail of crimson smeared across the floor. Like something had been dragged. It led toward the chapel. I followed it. I should have run, but something pulled me forward. My legs moved on their own. Inside the chapel, the giant wooden cross had fallen. It lay broken at the foot of the altar, like a toppled statue. The blood trail ended at the base. And standing there was Perez, or what used to be him. He was smiling. Not the kind of smile that means happiness. The kind that means someone knows something you don't. His voice was soft, barely above a whisper. You found it, didn't you? I couldn't answer. My throat was dry. My hands clenched the edges of the journal like a shield. He took a step closer. Chains rattled on his wrists, dragging across the stone. You read the line, he said. I felt it. The moment your eyes saw it, something shifted. Didn't it? I nodded. Slowly. He knelt beside the broken cross. You don't understand what that line is, Edward. It's not a spell. It's not a key. It's a door. And once it opens, his eyes turn pitch black. It doesn't close. I stepped back. The journal felt heavy in my hands. The words pulsed beneath the leather like a heartbeat. I need to end this, I whispered. Perez smiled wider. Then say it. Let's see what burns first, me or you. Then he laughed. A deep, echoing sound that shook the air. I ran. I didn't look back. The laughter followed me down the halls, clinging to the walls like fog. I didn't stop until I was back in my room, locking the door, pressing my back against it like that could stop what was coming. I stared at the journal again. That line, that cursed, forbidden line. I was going to say it. Soon. Because I had no choice. And I was beginning to suspect, neither did Perez. The room was silent except for the sound of my breathing, and even that seemed wrong. It echoed too much, as if the walls were listening, as if they were waiting. I stood at the edge of the ritual circle, chalk in one hand, the torn page with the 14th forbidden line in the other. My hand trembled. The ink on the page looked fresh, almost wet, though I had found it folded inside a decaying priest's robe deep in the catacombs just the day before. Perez sat in the center of the circle, his wrists bound, though the ropes pulsed like veins, moving as if alive. His head hung low, his skin pale, eyes shut. He looked more corpse than man. Yet I knew better. The thing inside him was awake. Watching. Waiting. The monks had abandoned me. Hours ago, they quietly vanished from the chapel, leaving candles flickering and incense burning cold. They had followed the rules. I had not. I had broken nearly all of them. Rule 2. Never perform the ritual at midnight. It's midnight now. Rule 6. Never bring light into the shadows beneath the altar. I had walked through those shadows with a torch. Rule 13. Never look at your own reflection during the exorcism. I had stared into the cracked mirror and seen myself grinning back. And now I was about to speak the 14th line, a line that should never be read. I knelt and laid the page on the floor beside me. My breath came faster. The circle was drawn, the candles lit, and the air wrong. Heavier, like something thick and invisible pressed down on my chest. Perez stirred. His head twitched, his mouth twitching into a slow, unnatural smile. His eyes opened, pure black, like ink poured into glass. You finally found it, he whispered, voice layered with something deeper, something not human. You know what happens if you say it. I didn't answer. My fingers touched the edge of my crucifix. It felt cold, not like metal, cold like stone from a grave. He grinned wider. Do it, Edward. Let's see what your God does now. I swallowed, stepped into the circle, and began the prayer. The regular chant, the one I had used 100 times before. Latin syllables filled the chapel. The shadows danced. Perez flinched. His body arched once, then went still. Then I paused. My eyes dropped to the torn page, the 14th line. The forbidden one. The one erased from every book and every scroll. The one I wasn't supposed to have. I read it aloud. The sound of my voice changed as I spoke it. It wasn't me. It was deeper. Ancient. Each word slid off my tongue like oil. The The candles blew out, all at once. Darkness rushed into the room like a wave. I could hear the walls creak and groan like they were alive and angry. Perez screamed. Not a human scream. Not even close. It was a sound that seemed to come from deep within the earth, a shriek that bent the air. His body lifted off the ground, twisting in impossible ways, bones cracking, skin stretching. His eyes rolled back, mouth wide open, but the scream didn't stop. Something clawed at the edge of the circle, from the inside. I could feel it, like wind, but hotter than fire. It wanted out. The symbols around the circle began to glow. Red at first, then white, then pitch black. The chalk lifted off the ground, floating in the air as if weightless. I kept chanting the forbidden line again. 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 And then silence. Everything stopped. Perez dropped to the floor with a thud, unmoving. The air shifted. The smell of burning flesh and wet stone filled my lungs. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking, blistered. My crucifix had turned completely black. Then I saw it. A shadow still stood across from me, outside the circle. Tall. Thin. Shapeless. Watching. It didn't speak. It didn't move. But I knew. The ritual had worked. Perez was free. But I hadn't cast the demon out. I had invited it. And now it stood in my world. And it wasn't leaving. The air was too still. It felt like the whole monastery had stopped breathing. Perez wasn't human anymore. His eyes glowed a dark red, and his skin shimmered like cracked glass, pulsing with something alive beneath it. He levitated above the altar, mouth open wide but not screaming, just letting out a deep, steady hum that rattled my ribs. The candle flames bent toward him like they were being pulled in. My hands shook as I held the old parchment. The final line, the forbidden one, was scrawled in dried blood. It wasn't Latin. It wasn't Greek. It was older, and I didn't know what it would do. Only that it might end this. Or me. Perez's body jerked once, then again, and suddenly his voice, his real voice, came through. Just for a moment. "Don't read it, Edward," he gasped. "It'll take you instead." The demon inside him laughed. Loud. Deep. It echoed through the stone walls like thunder. So noble. So tired. It mocked through Perez's cracked lips. "Say your final prayer, priest." I looked around the chapel. The crucifix above the altar had split down the middle. The icon of Saint Cyprian was bleeding from the eyes. The rule scroll, once nailed to the wall, now floated in the air behind me, pages tearing themselves into strips. This was it. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I spoke the 14th line. The world didn't just shake, it flipped. The floor felt like it had dropped away, and I was falling upward. I saw things, horrible, beautiful things, images that didn't belong in a human mind. Cities made of bone. Stars weeping fire. Faces twisted into spirals of agony and praise. And then silence. Perez dropped to the ground with a loud thud. His body lay still. The red glow faded from his eyes. He blinked once and looked at me, really looked at me. Did it work? Before I could answer, I felt it. Not wind. Not sound. Just a presence. Cold and ancient and hungry. It stood behind me, though I couldn't turn to see it. "You have broken the rules," it whispered. "So now you must choose." It spoke not with words, but with certainty, as if its thoughts poured into my soul. "One of you must carry me." Perez was barely alive. He'd been its prison long enough. I had no right to hand it back to him. And maybe I had been waiting for this. Maybe I wanted punishment. Maybe I wanted to understand it. "I'll take you," I whispered. Time froze. My voice echoed, as if it had been spoken in 10,000 churches all at once. Perez began to scream. Not from fear, but from release. The chapel turned black. Not dark, black. Like something had pulled the light from the world. I felt a sharp stab in my spine, like claws dragging down my back. Then warmth in my chest, followed by something worse than pain, understanding. Every broken rule, every secret hidden by the church, every lie told in God's name, I saw it all. The demon slid into me like water soaking into dry ground. And then, silence again. Perez lay still, breathing, human. The air smelled like burnt roses and ash. The monks were gone. I was alone. I touched my cross. It was no longer silver. It was black, like obsidian, and it was warm. I staggered out of the chapel, the sky above me spinning. Rain began to fall, silent and red. Something inside me whispered, "Thank you," and I didn't know if it was mocking me, or meaning it, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't just an exorcist anymore. I was the container. And the rules? They were no longer meant for me. They were meant for the world. To keep it safe from what I had become. And God help them if they forget. The scream still echoed in my ears as I stumbled through the long stone corridor, half dragging Perez's unconscious body behind me. The air was thick with ash and sulfur. Fire danced along the wooden beams overhead, casting twisted shadows against the walls like writhing serpents. Smoke poured from the chapel above, and with every step, the floor seemed to groan beneath us, as if the monastery itself was begging to die. I didn't know if what I had done was right. All I knew was that the 14th line worked. The ritual had reached its end the moment I spoke it aloud. Time cracked. Reality flickered. Perez screamed like he was being pulled apart cell by cell. Then silence. He dropped to the floor like a puppet with cut strings. But Thamiel didn't vanish. He passed through me. I didn't know what that meant yet. I didn't want to. My robes were soaked in sweat and blood, some mine, some not. The crucifix around my neck had turned from gold to a charred, metallic black. It felt heavier now, like it was holding something more than just metal. I turned a corner, nearly collapsing against the cold stone wall. Through the haze, I saw Brother Ignatius, the last monk who had stayed behind. He stood at the monastery gates, his face lit by the flames behind me. "You shouldn't have said the last line," he whispered. His eyes were wide with fear, not of me, but of what followed me. I didn't answer. What could I say? That the church lied? That the rules weren't to protect me, but to trap Thamiel, only enough to keep him useful? Behind me, the chapel tower groaned and began to crumble. Bricks rained down as the bell, long rusted and black with age, broke free and fell, crashing through the roof below. I crossed the threshold and stepped into the icy night air. The monastery gates swung open on their own. No one touched them. The moment I stepped outside, the fire roared higher. The structure that had held centuries of secrets, the place where I had been trained, where men whispered prayers in languages older than empires, was finally falling. Not by the devil's hand, but by mine. I looked back one last time. Through the smoke, I thought I saw a figure standing inside the flames. Not Perez. Not a monk. Something tall, wrapped in darkness. Watching. I blinked. Gone. Perez was still breathing. I laid him on the cold grass and looked down at his face. He looked peaceful, almost like he was asleep. The demon was gone. Whatever part of him that had been twisted by darkness was no longer there. But I couldn't feel peace. Not with the whisper I now heard in the back of my mind. Not with the faint sound of chains dragging behind me wherever I walked. Thamiel had accepted my offer. He left Perez and entered me. I sat there in silence as the flames consumed the only home I had ever known. The sky above was dark, no stars, no moon, just smoke. Behind me, the monastery burned. In front of me, nothing but the long road down the mountain and a future I no longer trusted. I didn't cry. I couldn't, because part of me was no longer mine. The flames still danced in my mind. Even now, weeks later, when I closed my eyes, I could smell the smoke of that cursed monastery and hear the groaning of its ancient stones as they collapsed into ash. But I made it out. I walked away when no one else did. Constantinople greeted me with noise, traffic, and the kind of normal life I hadn't felt in what seemed like years. People hurried across streets, clutching their morning coffee, laughing, talking on phones. No one looked at me twice. They didn't know the weight I carried in my chest like a second, darker heart. I moved into a small apartment above a bakery, where the scent of warm bread helped me sleep at night. I kept to myself. I didn't wear the robe of an exorcist anymore. I didn't attend church. I hadn't prayed in days. Then one morning it arrived. Slipped under my door was an envelope, thick, yellowed, sealed with red wax. The same seal I had seen on the scroll back at the monastery. The same trembling feeling returned to my stomach. I stared at it for hours. Just sat there on the edge of my bed, the envelope resting on my lap like a sleeping animal I was afraid to wake. When I finally opened it, my hands were shaking. Inside was a new scroll. Not 13 rules. Just 12. They were written in the same ink, the same hand, the same cold voice between the lines. But they were different. Rule 1. Never return to the monastery of St. Cyprian. Rule 2. If the possessed speaks in a voice you recognize, do not answer. Rule 3. The demon always remembers. Rule 4. Silence is sometimes a lie. Rule 5. Mirrors are no longer safe. Rule 6. If you smell sulfur, leave immediately. Rule 7. Never speak the 14th line again. Rule 8. Shadows may follow you. Do not follow them back. Rule 9. The church will not come. Rule 10. Your name is known. Do not use it aloud. Rule 11. Holy water must now be blessed by you. Rule 12. There is no Rule 13. There never was. I read them again. And again. And something inside me began to shake. I didn't know what was worse, that they had sent new rules, or that they knew I had broken every single one of the old ones. I folded the scroll and placed it under my pillow. That night, I couldn't sleep. The shadows in the corners of my room were deeper than they should have been. My mirror was covered with a cloth, but I kept thinking I saw movement beneath it. And then, just before dawn, I heard something. 3 soft knocks on my door. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then came a voice. Not loud. Not threatening. Just familiar. Edward, it whispered. My name. Used like bait. I never told anyone what happened in that monastery. And yet, somehow something new. I stayed silent, remembering Rule 2. The knock didn't come again. The voice didn't return. But when I looked under the door, there were ashes on the floor. Whatever had left them didn't need fire to burn its mark. And I realized something that made my blood turn cold. These new rules weren't instructions. They were warnings. And somewhere, in the silence between each line, was a promise. The demon wasn't gone. It was just waiting, watching, and now it knew my name. I used to think silence was peaceful. Now I dread it. It's been 2 weeks since I left the monastery of St. Cyprian. 2 weeks since I walked out of that burning relic of stone and screams. 2 weeks since I broke nearly every sacred rule I had sworn to follow. I'm back in Constantinople now. My apartment is just as I left it, modest, neat, filled with the smell of old books and burnt incense. The cross above my bed is still there, but now I stare at it more than I pray to it. Something came back with me. I know it. The first sign was the whispering. At first, I thought it was the neighbors through the walls. But the sounds don't follow the normal patterns of human speech. It's like someone is murmuring backwards, foreign, fluid, and low. I hear it most at night, from inside the walls behind my bed, or from the closet I never use. Sometimes it stops the moment I focus. Other times, it grows louder the longer I ignore it, like it's trying to get my attention. The second sign was the mirror. I've always had a routine: wake up, brush my teeth, shave. But that morning, the mirror didn't act like it used to. I blinked, and my reflection didn't. I stood still. So did it. I raised my hand. So did it. But then it tilted its head just slightly to the left, while I stood straight. My stomach sank. I turned away, heart pounding. Since then, I've kept every mirror in my apartment covered. Even the one in my phone's camera. It's not paranoia if it's happened twice. And then there's the dream. I keep having the same one. I'm back in the catacombs beneath the monastery, walking barefoot along a path lit by candles that float in the air. The walls are made of bones, some human, some not. I hear chanting, not in any language I've learned, but I understand it all the same. It calls my name, slow and deliberate. Edward. Edward. As if tasting it. And just before I wake, I see him, Perez. He stands at the end of the hall, whole and clean. No blood, no chains, no blackened eyes. He smiles and says, "You didn't save me. You traded places." Then I wake up, soaked in sweat, gasping for air, hands trembling. This morning, I received another letter. The envelope was white this time, sealed with a pale blue stamp of the church's symbol. Inside was a document, new fresh parchment. 12 rules. Not 13. Not 14. Just 12. The heading said, "Revised Protocol for the Protection of Sacred Workers." I scanned them, heart racing. Most were familiar. But then my eyes locked on the first one. Rule 1. Never return to the monastery of St. Cyprian. I dropped the paper and stared at my wall. There, between the cracks in the plaster, something was breathing. I could hear it. I could feel it. And in that moment, I knew something for certain. I may have cast Thamiel out of Perez, but I never said he left the monastery empty-handed. And now, in the dark corners of my home, in the folds of every shadow, I am not alone.